Okay, hi. Listen, the basis for the shiur tonight is current events, unfortunate current events that we all know is going on. Um, the Israeli army estimates that about 15% of the casualties in the military action in Gaza is from friendly fire. Um, and it's called Yeri Dutz Dadi is the name. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Dutz Dadi, right? It's facing inwards. In other words, it's we translate it as friendly fire. That's what we call it. And the reason for that is because war is hell. It's absolute hell. It's absolute chaos. And we all know about the famous case that happened a few weeks ago when three of the hostages were raising a white flag, surrendering, speaking Hebrew, and they were still killed by Tzahal. Because again, war is chaos, war is hell. Um, and so it's tragic when we read about these stories, it's very painful. But the question is, both from a halachic and perhaps even a hashkafic standpoint, someone who ends up causing the death of another person through no fault of their own, and especially when they end up killing someone accidentally because of friendly fire. What is the consequence of that? Obviously, there's going to be horrible psychological trauma, PTSD, and a lot of a person scarred for life. There's no question. Is there some kind of protocol of tshuva that person needs to undertake in order to go through some kind of kapara process, some kind of atonement process? And that's really the question that is being sort of asked by some of the religious thinkers on this very topic. So, really, the first thing I want to do is I want to share with you I want to look at the last sheet in our handout tonight, page 4. I want us to look at that first because we're going to look at some of the sources that are cited in a tshuva from Usher Weiss. But I find that some of the citations that he brings are really not necessarily so applicable to our situation, and you'll see in just a second. But let's take a look. This is just a recent, Daf Hashavua sheet called Mishpat Kahalacha. It's Piskei Din from the Beis Din Tzedek of Mishpat Kahalacha from Rabbi Yonatan Shoshan. I'm not really familiar with it, other than I found it online, so it's being circulated in Eretz Yisrael. So, and the question that it's multi pages, but we're just going to look at the first page tonight, and I hope that either next week or the next time we meet, we'll be able to go over the remainder of this packet. And the question that is being asked is, Ha'im hachayalim shahargu chatofim b'sajaya ba'aza b'ta'ut tzrichim kapara shel galut. The question is, accidental killers. We know that there's a din of ir miklat, right? You have to go exile yourself to a city of refuge. So this may only be a theoretical question, an academic question, because we don't have any Ari Miklat anymore. Or perhaps really the question is that in lieu of having a formal Ir Miklat, maybe there's some aspect of gullus, of exile, self-imposed exile, that may apply even today in the absence of an Ir Miklat, when I find that I've accidentally killed an innocent Jew. Okay? Lifnei kama shavuot b'yitz. Right? That's part of the shaila. Is a kohen shaharages hanefesh lo yala leduchen. It's a halacha psuka in Shulchan Aruch. So that's a subset of this question. But the larger question is, what is the penance for someone? I guess maybe that would be a good way of saying it. What is the penance of someone who's accidentally killed? This doesn't just apply on the battlefield. God forbid, Rahmana litzlan, a guy's in a car accident and he ends up hitting an innocent pedestrian or another car and someone dies, God forbid. What is the penance of that individual? Should that person's sense of feeling of responsibility? What actions, if any, should that individual be taking? Okay, so it's a general question. And we're only going to look at one aspect tonight, but I want us to first look at the sheet to set up the scenario and ask the right questions. So lifnei kama shavuot b'yitzuma shel milchemet charvot barzel kara tragadia. He says a number of weeks ago, in the midst of the Iron Swords operation, a tragedy occurred. Shechayalei tzahal yaru b'shlosha chatufim lemavet, that they shot to death 3 of the hostages, biglal shechashvu shehem mechablim, because they thought that they were terrorists. Gam acharei shehem tza'aku hatzilu b'safa ivrit, even though they even said the words hatzilu, save us, in Hebrew. Begam acharei shehoridu bigdeihem, and they took off their I guess their overclothing or their shirts. Bishvil shiur shehem belina shakim, so that they could see that they were unarmed. Begam acharei shehem herimu yadayim laod shehem nichnaim, and after they raised their hands in surrender. V'zeh kara machmat shehachayalim chashvu shemedubar b'mechablim sheosim lahem pitayon kedei sheyitkarvu aleihem. And how did this happen? He says, because the soldiers mistakenly thought that they were terrorists and they were playing a trick so to convince the soldiers to come closer to them. Maybe there was a booby trap, whatever. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, other terrorists would pop out and they would attack. Now, once these soldiers discovered what they had done, they entered into a sense of absolute brokenness of spirit and depression, okay? Because they just discovered that instead of killing terrorists, they had killed their fellow Jews. Ubanu ladun bazeh, ha'im nechshav hadavar lahoreg b'shogeg shetzarich kapara al zeh. The question is such a soldier called a horeg b'shogeg? He's killed unintentionally. He needs a kapara, kemo galut, such as going into exile. V'chein sha'asur lahem la'alot l'nesias kapayim. And also, like Laser correctly pointed out, if they're kohanim, they would not be allowed to duchen. Oh, shehayot v'heim anusim. On the other hand, you could make a counter argument. They're not shogegim. They're anusim, shechashvu shehem mechablim, because they thought that they were terrorists. Shaharei mi shemistovev ba'aza ze mechablim. He says, what other people are you going to find in Khan Yunis and in Gaza City walking around? 99% of them are terrorists. V'hachatufim nimtzaim amok b'minharot. The terrorists are not going to be, the hostages are not expected to be wandering around the streets because they're supposed to be detained underground in tunnels. They had no way of entertaining the idea that they could possibly be their fellow Jews. Therefore, using this logic, maybe they're called a horeg, not b'shogeg, but a horeg ba'ones, with complete lack of blame whatsoever, ve'einam tzrichim shum kapara, and therefore they shouldn't be required to have any kind of penance. V'chein harbe shoalim, ha'im zeni krashen nehergu al kiddush Hashem, heyot v'nehergu al yedei Yehudim v'lo al yedei Aravim. Now here's another question, a subsidiary question, which is the hostages who were killed by our own chayalim. Did they die al Kiddush Hashem? Because they weren't killed by Arabs, but rather they were killed by mistake, by friendly fire? O shezeh lo mishaneh, heyot v'nehergu b'milchama, he says, gam im zal yedei Yehudim, nechshav hadavar kenehergu al Kiddush Hashem. He says, on the other hand, the counter argument to that is, they were killed in wartime. And they were killed because they were Jews, even though they were killed by fellow Jews. And therefore, it's considered as if they died al Kiddush Hashem, that they did die al Kiddush Hashem, she'en adam uvriya yecholim la'abod b'mechitzatam, that no human being can enter into their high holy sanctum because they died al Kiddush Hashem. I mean, it's a heartbreaking question. These questions are heartbreaking, right? Because while they may not have that much halachic import, as far as, okay, so what do I do, right? But what's our attitude towards the people who killed, and what's our attitude towards the people who were killed? It's really more of a philosophical question. Okay, so let's now continue. Chayal sheyara b'shogeg al ezrach b'pigua b'knisa li'ir b'Yerushalayim. He says a similar issue is a soldier who accidentally shot during a pigua, during a terror attack, during a protest, a pigua, a terror attack, b'knisa li'ir b'Yerushalayim, at the entrance of the city of Jerusalem. V'chein kara'ot tragadia b'knisa li'ir Yerushalayim. Shehigiu shnei mechablim. He says what happened was there were two terrorists that came to the entrance of Jerusalem. V'hitchilu l'rasei siriyot al kol ha'ovrim v'shavim. And they started to spray fire on anyone who was coming in and out of on the road. V'hayu sham shnei chayalim shahayu b'darkam la'aza. So there were two soldiers that were actually on their way to go into Gaza. V'chisharo et zeh hitchilu lirot b'mechablim. And so when they saw what was going on, they started shooting the terrorists. V'haya sham od ezrach shehotzi et ha'egdach shelo b'shvil lirot b'mechablim. And there was a third guy who was a private citizen, pulled out his pistol so that he could aid the neutralization of these terrorists. Aval hachayalim shera'u oto im ha'ekdach chashvu shuhu mechabel. But the two soldiers who saw this guy with a pistol thought that he was a terrorist. He didn't identify himself. He wasn't wearing an army uniform. So v'yaru bo l'mavet biglal ta'ut b'zihui. And so they ended up killing him because they thought he was one of the terrorists instead of one of the guys who was trying to stop the terrorists. I think that word is, I'm not sure if it's, maybe someone wants to look it up, but it probably has something to do with nervousness, or he had a nervous breakdown perhaps. Al ha'ta'ut, over the mistake. Shaharei lo chashav l'rega shezeh Yehudi. Because he never thought for a moment that this was a Jew, that the guy he shot. The question is, does he need any kind of penance for what he did? Or maybe he doesn't need any kind of kapara because this is a fauda situation. It's like a total chaotic situation. Because based on what they saw, they had no way of knowing that whether he was a terrorist or an Israeli. They thought he was a terrorist, and therefore it's totally onus. What's the translation, Simi? You haven't found it yet, huh? Okay, but you get the idea. The guy had some kind of breakdown. Next. Yeah. Okay. Next. Yeri dutz dadi mechayalim bishat milchama. Friendly fire during wartime. Yesh bitzava musag shenikra yeri dots or dutz. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Anyone know how to pronounce it? So he says they call friendly fire yeri dots, which is short for dutz dadi. He says because there's such a concentration of soldiers in one place, yesh machil handasa, yesh mechel handasa, v'yesh mechel shiryon. He says there's one unit of engineering. There's an engineering unit. And then there's a unit of shiryon, tanks, okay. He says a lot of times, it's chaotic, and they sometimes end up shooting fellow soldiers. Okay. V'zen nikra yeri b'shogeg. This is unintended fire. V'ha'im gam bazeh shaharag Yehudi b'taut tzarich kapara shel galut o tzura acheret o lo. The question is, does this person need some kind of kapara, whether it's to go into exile or some other kind of kapara? Now, then the next one is Hahumlas she'af migag hamasait shel tenuva be'emtza hashena. I'm not even sure what that means. Let's take a look at what the paragraph says. Chico Jungerman, Yehudi shelo shapar alav mazalo. So this is a guy, Chico Jungerman, is a guy who was a shlamazel. Apparently he had umitnahel kemohum las birchavot, v'yoshein beleilot al hasaf salim. Okay, but one homeless. He conducts himself like a homeless dude in the streets. He sleeps on park benches at night. V'chein bevatei knesiyot. V'yom echad hu echlit shehu rotzeh lishon tov b'li shekol hachatulim shel hashchuna yatridu oto. So he decided one day he didn't want to be bothered by the cats in the neighborhood. V'lachein hechlit la'alot al gag hamasait shel tenuva. So he went on top of the truck, the tenuva truck. Shechone be'ezoro ve'ala im hasmicha shelo al hamasait. So he sleeps on the rooftop of the truck with a blanket. Okay, v'yashen shinat yisharim, and he's sound asleep. Uvisha'a chamesh baboker kam Nemuel Yazdi nahag hamasait. So this guy named Nemuel Yazdi gets into the truck. It's time to take off. 5 a.m. You're delivering the milk. And he starts driving off without knowing that there's this homeless dude sleeping on the top of his truck. It's not so funny because and when he got to the traffic light, he wanted to speed up to make the green light, but he was unsuccessful. So he had to come to a really short stop, an abrupt stop. So he sees something flying off his roof. Homeless So he realizes it's this homeless guy who's fallen off the top of his truck. Umiyad yarad mehamasait bebehala, v'nisa lirotim hu'ar, v'hu she'en kol ve'en oneh. He realizes the guy is totally unresponsive. Umiyad hizmin hatzala, v'tipol nimrat shigiu l'makom. So he immediately calls hatzala. They go to see what's up. V'nisu lahachyoto avala avon kolev hahomeless halach la'olam shekulo tov. And unfortunately, they could not revive him. The guy unfortunately went to the next world. Aval hanahag masait Nemuel Yazdi higia lishaol shemikivun shehu harag Yehudi b'shogeg v'yesh lo nervin ha'im tzarich kapara kaharag b'shogeg olo. So he's reached the absolute pits. This guy, this fellow Nemuel, and he's totally distraught. And he wants to know, what should I do? Did I kill someone unintentionally? Do I need some kind of kapara? Okay, so okay, won't look in the. So let's look at the tshuvot. You could put a lot of things into this, right? There's so many situations where a person has to really thank the Ribono Shalom. You know what? Every time you get behind a car and you park for the night, person should bench goimel. Thank God. Not that I wasn't injured, but that I didn't harm anyone else. Because a car in itself is a weapon. It could be, I'd much rather, God forbid, if I had to choose, I'd rather get killed in a car accident than kill somebody else in a car accident. It's when you think about it, it's a horrible thought. So anyway, we'll first look at the tshuvot that he brings us, and then I want to look at some makoros with you. B'chol hadvarim halalu ein shom chiyuv shel golus shezenem araksha hahariga haita b'shogeg v'hayatzarich lizaher. So as a general rule, what do we call hariga b'shogeg? Unintended killing that requires some penance of going into gullus is where a person should have been more careful, and there's some aspect of negligence. Aval kan mugdar hadavar ka'ones gamur kishahaya kan ta'ut bizihoy. But this is a total accident whenever it's a case of mistaken identity. He says, and when a soldier is engaged in trying to kill the enemy, so she'ein chiyuv gam im karta aveira be'emtza uchamo sheyivuar. And therefore, even if some kind of mishap occurs in the middle, he is completely not liable. V'chein yecholim la'alot l'nesias kapayim heyot v'chayalim nechshavim k'mi she'ansu otam lavo lamilchama v'laharog al pi haraot hamifaked. He says, and not only that, but if he's a Kohen, he's allowed to commence duchening, because he's no different. He's really coerced to get onto the battlefield and start shooting by the command of his superior officer. She'ein bozeh psul lisat kapeim. In that situation, there's no psul of duchening. As we will explain inside when we expand on this topic. Now the question is, what about those people who died by friendly fire, or Nebuch, those hostages who were killed by Chayalim? So did they die al Kiddush Hashem? So Huba b'shem Hagrach Kanievsky shehebi raya mitoisus yantiv she'im hahariga ne'esta bizman habehola me'ha'oivim. He says, if a person died even by friendly fire at a time of absolute chaos that is a result of our enemies who are seeking our destruction, chashuv kamo shemetu me'ha'oivim atzmam. They are considered to have died by the enemy at the enemy's hand. It's as if Hamas killed them. And therefore they are in the holiest of sanctums that no one can reach. Bays, number 2. So that puts that to rest. Number 2, there is no greater chaos or confusion when you have terrorists firing at you. Veroim sham adami mekdach, and you have to try and neutralize them as quickly as possible. And then you see another person with a pistol, v'orim alav, and they fire upon that person ki choshvim shu mechabel, because they think that he's also a terrorist. So in other words, there was no way for them to know. V'lachein ein tzarich shum kapara ba'asharav shehitzil alofim midei hamiratzchim. And if anything, just the opposite. Those chayalim, even though they killed an innocent Israeli person, they should also be praised, because look at how many Jews' lives they ended up saving by killing the terrorists. Gimel, number 3. He says friendly fire is also, that's like oines. The ein tzarich kapara. No kapar is necessary. And these people can duchen. We'll explain that inside. And finally, number 4, homeless al hagag. And certainly the guy, the Teshuva truck driver, there was no way for him, like when you get into your truck at 5 in the morning, you have to check the rooftop of your truck. I'm sure this guy is going to be checking the roof of his truck for the rest of his life if he continues driving a truck. But who would have thought? Who would have thunk, right? There was no way for him to entertain that. And therefore he doesn't require any kind of self-imposed exile or any other kind of penance. Now you see very clearly that the author of this tshuva wants to really be quite emphatic that, we can't afford. It's almost like if you read between the lines, it's like we can't afford to think about penance when things go wrong during wartime. Because once we start thinking that, guess what happens? People hesitate, lives are lost. Now I'm going to show you that svara in just a moment. But the reason why I got involved in this is because I was listening to a shiur from Rav Asher Weiss, who spoke to the boys at Mevaseret about a week ago, and he was talking about this very idea about friendly fire, and he was talking about this whole idea of what kind of kapara does a Jew need if he accidentally kills another Jew, especially in the context of war. He referred his audience to a tshuva that he had written in the Minchas Asher on Parshas Vayigash that I was able to find online. I'm going to give a disclaimer at this point and tell you that I find that this tshuva does not really fit so much the scenario that we're discussing here. Because what Rabbi Weiss was talking about in this tshuva was a person who causes the demise of another person indirectly. And there's a lot of Torah, in the tshuvas, does a person have to do tshuva for being somewhat indirectly a cause of someone else's death that was an unintended consequence of a purely innocent act. Here, the rifle was in the soldier's hands. He shot it directly at someone who he thought was an enemy, and it turned out to be an ally, and it's a much more direct kind of act. But nonetheless, as we'll see, there's Rav Weiss was able to extract from this tshuva that under no circumstances should we even suggest that if a soldier accidentally kills a fellow Jew in the course of this war, that he should think that he has to do some kind of tshuva or penance, because that's only going to cause hesitation and cause a lack of action when we can't afford to have that. So I want to just start off, because it's a tshuva that he wrote, appended to a pasuk in Parshas Vayigash. So let's start there. The pasuk in Bereshis is Vayomer Yisrael El Yosef Amusa Hapa'am, that when Yaakov and Yosef reunite for the first time after Yosef, exposes who he is to his brothers, he fetches his father Yaakov to come down to Mitzrayim, and they have this very tearful and emotional reunion. And Yaakov says to Yosef, Amusa Hapam, I can finally die now. Now that I've seen your face and that you are still alive. So Rashi quotes a medrash as to what the deeper meaning of what Yaakov was saying when he said, Amusa Hapam, this time I can die. Savor hayiti lamut shtei mitot ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. I originally thought that when I lost you, Yosef, and I thought you were dead, that I was going to die two deaths. I thought I was going to die the death of this natural life, plus I would die the life of Olam Haba, because I was somehow to blame for your death. Shenistalka shchina mimeni, v'hayiti omer sheyitva'eni hakadosh baruch hu misascha. Because the Shekhinah departed from me, and I thought that was a sign that God was blaming me for your death. But now that I see that you're alive, amusa hapam, only this time will I die. I'm not going to die in Olam Haba, because I didn't indirectly cause your death. In other words, part of what Yaakov was lamenting all those years that Yosef was away is that he felt guilty. He said, what did I do? I sent Yosef out on his own, thinking that it was totally safe. And now he's dead because of me. If I hadn't sent him out to find his brothers, he would still be alive today. But now that I know that you're okay, I'm only going to die once. I'm not going to die in Olam Haba. So this, Rav Weiss wants to suggest, is a sign that if a person causes the demise of another individual, even though it was completely unintentional, you can infer from here that such a person on some level is blameworthy and is subject to some kind of punishment, even if it's only a heavenly punishment. Right? That's what he wants to bring a raya from. Now, no other poskim bring this, and Rav Weiss wonders why no one else brings this as a raya. But be that as it may, he uses this as a launch pad to discuss the whole idea of when is someone considered to be requiring kapara because they caused someone else's demise. And he starts off, in order for us to understand it, we need to take a look at two quick Gemaras. One is the Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Kuf Yud Tes, at the very bottom of Amud Aleph. Kach haya Reb Shimon HaShikmoni Omer, Re'uya haisa Parshas Nachalos Likasev Al Yedei Moshe. It's a famous Gemara. That the Gemara says that really Moshe Rabbeinu, just like he gave all of the other mitzvahs, should have been the one to directly give the mitzvahs of Yerusha, the laws of how one generation inherits from the generation before it. Ella shezachu benos Tzalafchad v'nichtaf al yadam. But the daughters of Tzalafchad, because of their righteousness and their valor, they were zoicha to be the catalyst for the laws of Nachala to be written in the Torah. And another example of this is that really Moshe should have himself directly been the giver of the halacha about what is the penalty for someone who's mechalel Shabbos, right? Ella shenischayev mekoshesh v'nichtav al yada. But because the mekoshesh was so guilty, was so bad, was such a rasha, he was sort of credited, so to speak, with the whole story of the mekoshesh eitzim, the gatherer of wood on Shabbos. And therefore, the law was given through his ignoble actions. The lamedcha shemegalgalin zechus al yedei zakai, the chova al yedei chayav. But that's to teach you that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like we say, harbe shluchim lamakom, that God has many proxies. But when God wants something good to get done, he will choose a good person to get that good thing done. And when God wants something tragic to occur, he will choose a tragic figure to bring about that tragedy. So there is this concept in Chazal that even if I'm totally righteous and I'm totally innocent, but if someone else died because of me, whether it was because of friendly fire, because my car hit them, or because anything else that happened, but because of something that I did, somebody is dead, then there is such a concept of megalgal in chova al yedei chayav, that I have to sort of now do some soul searching and find out, what did I do to deserve to be Hashem's shaliach to bring about something bad in the world? Okay, so that's another concept that we have in Chazal. Next, if you take a look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav, Ish Sheba al Iske Nov, that the Gemara describes what happened in the situation of the city of Nov Ir Kohanim, which is in Shmuel Aleph Perek Chaf Beis, where we know the story that David HaMelech was seeking refuge from Shaul. He went to the city of Nov, Ir HaKohanim, and he asked for them for some provision and for lodging. They provided it to him. And Doeg HaEdomi, who was Shaul's advisor, tattletaled, spoke Lashon Hara about the people of Nov, told King Saul what the people of Nov had done, and through Doeg and David's actions, Shaul killed the entire city of Nov Ir HaKohanim. So Amar Le HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeDavid, Ad Masa Yihiyeh Avon Zeh Tamun Biyadcha. David, for how long shall this sin of you being the cause of the city of Nov to be put to death, how long are you going to harbor that within yourself? Al Yadcha Neherga Nov Ir HaKohanim. It is because of you that the city of Nov and all of its inhabitants were killed. Val Yadcha Nitra Doeg HaEdomi. It is because of you that Doeg HaEdomi was nichshal to speak Lashon Hara about you, and he also was eventually met his demise. And it was because of you, because I guess you instigated Shaul to kill the whole city, that eventually he was punished and he was killed together with his three sons. And therefore Hashem said to him, even though David, what you did was totally innocent. You didn't kill the people of Nov. You just sought refuge from the people of Nov. You didn't do anything. But nonetheless, because of you, people died. So I give you a choice, David. Either I'm going to kill some of your children, or you will be arrested and taken captive by one of your enemies. Which one would you prefer? So Amar Lefanav, Ribono Shel Olam, Muta b'Moser bi'ad Oye v'lo yichle zari. And David said, I'd rather be taken captive by one of my enemies, captured by one of my enemies. And that's what happened. There was a man named Shavibanov, I think that's what his name was. He was the brother of Goliath. And he was able to, or Ishbibanov, something like that, that the Gemara identifies, that David was captured by this person, and David was able to narrowly escape being killed by him. Why is his name associated with Nov? Because David was HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated David's punishment because David indirectly and without any malice caused the death of Novir Kohanim, caused the death of Doeg HaEdomi, and caused the death of Shaul and his three sons. Okay? So what you see from this Gemara is something quite startling. I may be involved, I may be completely innocent, but if because of me people die, then on some level I deserve punishment. And that really raises the question in a number of circumstances, do we say that if a person is in a situation where someone died through him, that he needs a kapara? This Gemara leads the Maharivayil from the early 16th century to the following conclusion. Source number 5. Chaim v'shalom, salutations, and Masha Kosav Echsha b'shlichutzcha neherag Reb Ezra Hashem Yikom Dama. So there's a whole story that I didn't publish that's not included in this paragraph, because the first paragraph of this story is all in Yiddish, in the Maharivayil, because it actually is stating verbatim the story that was told to the Maharivayil. What happened is that there was a young man who was, he was I guess what we would call today, he was a Schwitzer. You know what a Schwitzer is, right? Like he was like a big shot, a kid who thought, he's going places. And he went over to one of the goyim and slapped him across the face. And this got the Gentile authorities furious. They wanted to arrest him. They wanted to do worse things to him. And so a Jew interfered, and he said, listen, do me a favor. I'll get this kid. I'll bring him back to you. And don't worry, I'll take care of this kid. So he was trying to save the kid from a really harsh punishment, possibly death. And so what happened was he started running after this kid, but this kid was a real mechutzav. So he was running away from this Jew. And in the course of running away from this Jew who was really only trying to help, the kid jumped into a ditch, ended up hitting something hard against his head, and he ended up dying, the kid. So this Jew is heartbroken now. I am the cause of this child's death, even though my intention was really to try and help the kid and save him from the Gentile authorities. Do I need a kapara? That was the question that was asked of the Maharivayil either in the 15th or 16th century. So he quotes the Gemara. He quotes this Gemara about David and Novir HaKohanim. So if you go to the third line of the Teshuva, Alma Afal Gav the David HaMelech Olav HaShalom Lo Pasha B'midi. So David did nothing wrong. Raksha al yado bo l'takala afilu hachinenash. But because he caused the downfall and the deaths of people, he was punished. Kol shekain hacha shebishichlus shebishlichuso bo'ilav hara hazos de'ika lemechash la'onesh yisurin. He says, so this Yid who tried to, save the kid but ended up causing the child's death, you should be worried that Hashem is going to punish you at some point. The tov shetekabel alecha yisurin kagon ta'anios mem yom. So instead of waiting for Hashem to afflict you, afflict yourself preemptively and fast 40 days. not necessarily 40 days consecutively, but fast 40 days, like every Monday and Thursday until you got gone through 40 days. And if this kid had himself young children, this young man, then make sure you take care of this guy's kids. That'll be your kapara. And just to support my argument, anyone who is punished because of my actions, then I will not be able to enter into the sanctum of Hashem. So therefore, based on that, the Maharivail says that if a person encounters a mishap because of someone else's actions, then the person who was indirectly responsible has to get a kapara. But the Tzemach Tzedek, who's from the 17th century, takes a completely different approach. And he tells us of a similar story, a totally different story. Uvda hava be'echad shesholach lechaveru mimakom lemakom b'shlichus. The kavalos schirus. So a guy is a businessman. He hires a sales rep, sends him out on a journey to go ahead and either make purchases or sales. Okay, and he says, "I'm going to pay you a certain salary for your travel." V'nasalo miyad mixas hadamim. Gives him a down payment for what he's going to pay him and says, when you come back, I'll pay you the rest. He says, and the guy was crossing the river. Now, when you cross the river, there's a group of logs that are tied together. You have to walk across the logs. And, it's not like exactly like a pavement on a bridge. Got to watch your step. So he slipped, fell off the logs, fell in the water, ended up drowning, and he died. The question is, does the guy who hired this fellow to travel on his behalf, does he need a kapara? So he got it likdamim. So he says, first of all, I'm not the first person to be asked this shaila. And he quotes the tshuva from the Maharivail, that such a person, because someone else died because of his efforts, does need a kapara. V'chein matzasi nami b'sefer Be'er Sheva, shekasav al maimer zeh be'perek chelek, mikan pasakti al ma'aser shahay Yehudi echad shesholach es chaver b'shlichus b'schirus chutz la'ir, uvelechto nereg hashaliach. In the Be'er Sheva, Sefer Be'er Sheva from Rav Eilenberg, he says the same idea. This is also from the 17th century. He says, I once sent a person, a businessman sent someone else, he hired a guy to go do his bidding outside the city. And while he was journeying, I guess he got attacked, he got mugged, and he was killed. And therefore, it's only proper for the person who caused this guy to die, indirectly, innocently, that he do something for penance. He says, and it was on that basis, the Be'er Sheva said, and I think maybe that Tzemach Tzedek is speaking now, that whenever I need something done outside the city, but I know that it's dangerous, I never send a Jew to go go do my bidding. Because I don't want to feel like I have to, like I'm going to be responsible if anything happens to that person. And I've advised the same to others, but unfortunately not everyone listens to my instructions. But he says, Amnam yeshli gimdum al psak zeh, v'lulei ki ein meshiven asarayos achar moisam hayanira li loima. He says, however, I have a bit of a problem with the psak of the Maharivail. And normally we say that once someone is dead, you can't really take issue with them because they're not there to defend their position. But I would like to say that there's a counter argument to all of this. And basically the argument of the Tzemach Tzedek is the chashu shliach bischar and ameshlech tzarich kapor klal. He says, when I hire someone to work for me, then I am not responsible whatsoever because they're doing the work for themselves. They're not doing it for me. And it's on that basis that the Tzemach Tzedek says that there are many instances where a person should not feel completely responsible, especially when you're hiring someone to work for you. They choose to take the risk. That's part of the reason why you're paying them, not only for their travel expenses, not only for their trouble, but also because they're taking a risk. They choose to take the risk for their own sake, and therefore you are not responsible whatsoever. So, and therefore we'll just read the last paragraph. He says, "Lekach nira she'en lazeh hasholcho shum pshia b'misas hashaliach baderech." And based on everything I've wrote, I feel that there's no negligence whatsoever. There's no responsibility to be borne by the person who hired the guy to travel out, out of the city. Ve'ein sarach kapara. He doesn't need any kind of atonement. Kein nira l'niyastaiti lahalacha. אבל למעשה, אחרי שהקדושים אשר בארץ המה מהריבל בתשובוסה ואחריו נגרו המרשל ומהרם לובלין שהביאו דברה וגם המחבר באר שבע כולם כספו שצריך כפר קצת. He says, but the fact is that people who are no longer alive, great gedolim had paskin that a person does need a kapara, and therefore enani kedai lachlok aleihem. וצריך כפרה כמו שכספו המה שיסנם עם יום, ויש לו בנים קטנים, ייתן להם בתורס צדקה וינוצל מצר וצוקה. And therefore, even though Me'ikar Hadin, I hold that these people are not responsible at all, nonetheless, even when you're not responsible, you should follow the advice of these great Gedolim who came before me and do the following two things. Number one, fast for 40 days when someone dies because of you. And number two, if they have small children who need to be supported through tzedakah, you should take it upon yourself to do whatever tzedakah you can to support the guy's kids. Okay. Next, the last thing I want to see with you, because the hour is getting late, is a tshuva from the Maharshal, who's, I believe, also he's from the 18th century, so it's a little bit later. He says, yeah, Harry. Apparently so. Apparently so. There's less of an achrayas and less of a kapara required if an unintentional death of a non-Jew results. Now, you're not going to feel any less horrible. I have a good friend who was involved in construction, and one of his workers fell off in a construction site, and Nebuch died. The guy needed counseling. The guy needed therapy because he felt somehow responsible. And maybe in the eyes of these earlier poskim, when the goyim were like really persecuting us, maybe there was a greater sense of, we can emotionally detach ourselves from them and not feel any sense of responsibility, but it's much harder to do that today. Okay, last tshuva that we'll see for tonight is from the Maharshal, and he writes, Kidvarim ha'elu hu ad lefanei bechakiru drisha, uba hanelav Rabbi Moshe bar Yitzchak ushalanim tzarach l'tshuva l'chapara. So again, a similar story where there's a guy named Rav Moshe bar Yitzchak who inadvertently caused the death of someone, and he wants to know if he needs tshuva and kapara. V'sipar lefanai shemei atzmo kibul alav b'shana rishona kama ta'anios v'sigufim u'me'ata muchen lekabel alav kefi asher yoru alav hamoyrim. And he says, already a year has passed, and I've fasted multiple times, and I'm here to ask you, Rebbe, what else should I do? I'll do whatever you tell me. He says, and I told him that in your situation, you need no kapara whatsoever. My revile, right? He says, and your situation is not at all analogous to the situation that the Maharivile was discussing. Below dummy klal, he says, the hasam sof nergu kulam shelo kedin ve'im lo nischaybu b'misas atzmam. He says, because in the case of Nov Ir HaKohanim, they were killed for no just cause whatsoever. They were not chayiv misa, the people of Nov Ir HaKohanim. Ma she'ein kein b'nidon zeh shahanar hanitva chayiv begilgul misas atzmo, ki mi kafa oso likfots ba'oso guma olipol sham, ve'enzu sibas moisha hanal. He says, however, in a case where the kid was running away and he decided to take a risk and jump into a ditch and ended up killing himself, he says that's not the same case as Novi or HaKohanim. Va'afal pisha amar Rabbeinu ein darkam shel bnei adam lisponim bidrachim. Ani mili le'inyan nefilas habor kesholchem lefi tumah lefi sh'adam bal machshavos. Aval benidon kazeh shehu nirdaf eratza livroach hayla lisbonim le'ezeh makom shirach v'lo yapilas atzmo legumos ube'eros. So he takes issue with the Maharivile. And he says that in the case of the Maharivile, when you're dealing with a Vilda Chaya of a kid who's running and is not looking where he's going and he jumps off a ledge or jumps into a ditch, he's the one who ended up causing his own death. You didn't cause his death. He says in the case of the Maharivile, the kid slapped one of the goyim, and the goyim overreacted and they wanted to drown him. Kilo yuchlu harelim lamod al dam esav achihem kasher bavanosenu harabim. And came Rabbi Moshe hanal lahatzilim min hagoyim ba uchedei liyasrok tzas b'shoitim olasos hechnei lifneihem olaratsos osam. And so this guy Moshe, who's in the case of the Maharivile, he wanted to show the goyim that he was on their side. He wanted to rough up the kid a little bit, show him he was aggressively going after him to protect the kid. And again, the circumstances of that situation were that this guy Moshe did absolutely nothing to directly cause the death of this child. Young man, he caused his own death. If he did Now here's a very important svara that the Maharshal introduces, and this is what we'll end with tonight. He says one of the reasons why you should not require this guy to do any tshuva or to find some kind of penance to perform is because you have to realize, what was he doing? He got involved in a situation to save a kid from being killed. And if you're going to penalize him now for his efforts, because even though he tried to make the situation better, the kid jumped in a ditch and ended up killing himself. So what are you going to do? You're going to tell him, oh, you're the bad guy. You caused this kid to die. So he's going to say next time, I'm just not going to get involved. I'm not going to get involved in trying to help kids who are acting like Vilda Chayas and are getting in trouble with the Goyim, because if I do, who knows? Maybe another kid will die because of my efforts to save Jews from these very, very aggressive Goyim. And he says, and I'll tell you, I get my cue from the Or Zarua. Now, what does the Or Zarua say? So if you take a look at the Or Zarua in Hilchos Erev Shabbos, the Or Zarua, and this is source number 8, he says something fascinating. He says, Vehecha shahaisa deleka. He says, if a fire broke out and a Jew went on Shabbos and said, I'm not sure if there are people inside that house or not, and based on the suffix, he went ahead and extinguished the fire. Now we know that kivoy, when there's no sakana, is a malacha. So the question comes up, I extinguished the fire on Shabbos on the possibility, because I wasn't sure whether there was anyone in the building or not. Now that we've gone into the building after the fire is extinguished and we discover that there were no bodies, do I need to be mechaper? Do I need to bring some kind of kapara for having done a malacha on Shabbos unnecessarily? See, he says, Ein srichim shum tainios v'shum tzedakah al zeh. So the Or Zarua says that there is absolutely no penance, no fasting, no tzedakah that this person should give. Shaharei behetera asu masha asu, because whoever put out the fire did so with complete heter. Because even if there's a possibility that there's a human life to be saved, you have to be machal Shabbos. Vafilu imem rotzim lasei stak al kach, based in mochim biyadam, she'im kain ata machshilam le'asid. And the Or Zarua says you have to stop them, even if they feel guilty and they want to voluntarily fast or give tzedakah, you refuse it. You say it's usher for you to fast. it's usher for you to do any act of penance. You know why? Because if you do that, other people are going to withhold that because they're going to say, that other guy ended up being Machal Shabbos, and look, he had to do some kind of kapara, and the next time a fire breaks out, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe Taka, the next time someone will be trapped in a fire in a house, and people won't realize it, and they want to be Machal Shabbos, and that will cause a terrible, terrible shalom. So the bottom line is that Rav Asher Weiss pointed to this issue and he said, and it's very similar to what you could read in between the lines of what we started with tonight. If we in any way imply that there's some guilt to be borne by a soldier who ended up killing someone in friendly fire, or killed one of the hostages by accident because he thought he was a mechabel, thought he was a terrorist, that's going to create hesitation, and it's going to create a breakdown of the morale of the soldiers, and it's going to make them hesitate the next time that they need to act decisively. And that really seems to be the prevailing attitude, and hopefully we'll be able to have a chance to continue this when we go through the rest of our sources next time. Questions, comments? Laser. More in Marcus. More in Marcus. That there's no repercussions for Hariga Ba'inas, right? Right, you would think, huh? So, like the tshuva of that we saw from the final page seems to be implying that when you're in the midst of the battle, on the battlefield, and when it's absolute chaos, the ein lecha oines gadol mizu. Yes, right. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes it's not an onus. I'll give you an example. In the next tshuva, which we didn't have a chance to see, there's an example brought. A case is brought where a guy is traveling for business, traveling with his entourage of workers, and they get caught in a snowstorm. So the boss says, okay, all of us we won't be able to travel through this snowstorm. So we're all gonna park here for the night. We'll stay at the lodge. But I definitely need one of you guys, one of the young guys, to go ahead and make sure that the delivery is made to the destination. So I need one brave guy, Moishe, you can do this. I know you're strong enough, you can handle this. The rest of us are going to park for the night. So in that case, I think it's the Yad Eliyahu who paskins that in that case, the guy does have a chrayas, because that's not an oinus anymore. If you didn't feel safe enough to do it yourself, what right did you have to designate for someone else to go ahead and put their lives in sakana, right? So there are going to be gradations in this. It's a lot, explaining it and, translating it into medicine. How often have you heard the question, Laser, if this was your child, or if this was your mother, what would you do in that case? Because people want to hear from the doctor that this is not just, I wouldn't do it, but I would do it for you because, I'm not connected to you. I feel detachment from you. So that, I guess, also speaks to like this, what is the standard of care? Did it meet the standard of care? And if it meets the standard of care and an oinus occurs, and we all know the risks involved for this procedure, but it's necessary to do it, and that's the standard of care, so that's an oinus.
The entire army would fall apart and you wouldn't be able to function well. I mean, that's the whole head through anyway.
Right.
Why would I get into such a thing? The lawyers don't agree with that, but
right.
talking about this
right.
Halacha. First, you know what I'm saying?
Right, right. I mean, people do go into medicine. I mean, why do people become doctors? Because they feel that this is an ideal, that they want to do something truly good with their lives. They want to be able to help save other people's lives, preserve other people's health. And so they look at the upside, not always looking at the downside. Uh, but, you know, but there are stories, obviously, of malpractice where people have been derelict in their standard of care. And yeah, they are guilty. Yeah. But again, I just want to point out, I wasn't so, while I certainly appreciate the point of the Or Zarua and Rav Asher Weiss invoking it, but the examples that are brought in the poskim here are indirect causation of death, not actual killing of a person. And so I'm still looking to find those cases where actual killing is still considered to be not in any way requiring a kapar. Yes, Eddie.
I mean, I guess the IDF is doing their own internal investigation. But are they using these halachic sources?
I have no idea. I'm sure that the IDF probably has very strict protocols in place as far as what to do in these situations. Look, one thing we do know is that there is a very, very strict code of ethics in the IDF. There's like some panel of like 23 judges who define how you're supposed to comport yourself during a time of war, dealing with both civilians and suspected terrorists. And whether or not these guys followed the protocols or not will be something that we'll probably discover over the next few days. But why did they think that they were terrorists? Because they never entertained that hostages would be wandering around Gaza, just on their own recognizance. They probably just never, like, it never entered their mind. Yeah. Right. Is it considered dying al Kiddush Hashem? Right. Yeah. In Achinami. In Achinami. I don't. Yeah. So if you let me know if you find anything. Yeah. 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 Very interesting. Yeah. That they died al Kiddush Hashem. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll hold it here.